Hey, look, everybody. The horse's eye over there, it's glowing, just like in my novels. Got horses with glowing eyes. The cat just about knocked over the video stand. I don't know if you saw that wobble. Pretty Miss Kitty, she's going to ruin this video. Well, let me tell you something, guys. This is my third writing advice video. Even more professional writing advice that you will not find anywhere else. Secrets to getting published. This time we're going to be focusing on agents, query letters, and editors, and just the bare bones facts of how you take your novel that you've written and get it published, okay? Just so you know, I am Brian Lee Durfee. I'm the author of The Forgetting Moon, published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. This book has been an Audible.com bestseller. It was the #2 best-selling novel in the world in July of 2019. So when it comes to writing novels and getting published, I know what I'm talking about. My books have been compared to George R.R. Martin, Brandon Sanderson, David Eddings, Stephen Donaldson, and thousands of others. They've been read around the world. It's even been published in Germany and the UK and Australia and everywhere else, you know. So you can get it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble. And please, please, please subscribe to my channel down below. The links to my other two, the trilogy, I've got a trilogy of writing videos. This is #3. The links to the other two are down, but you can find those down below. Please click, watch those. You will learn how to write in those videos. This time you're going to be learning how to query agents, get an editor, get an agent, all that stuff, business stuff about just the writing business in general. And so let's get started. Let me just start at the beginning and tell you what happened with me. I've wanted to be a writer ever since I was a teenager, and I read The Sword of Shannara. It was the first fantasy book that really captured my attention and wanted me to write. I kind of kept that dream alive through my life, but I just never really did anything with the dream. I had other careers. I had carpet cleaner. I was a magic card. I did magic card gathering illustrations. I did Tolkien illustrations. I did illustrations for Dungeons and Dragons. Like I said, I did carpet cleaning. I had prison guard. I did a lot of things, but I always had it in the back of my mind that I wanted to write books. Well, eventually, I decided to settle down and write a book. The first book that I wrote, I wanted to be like Stephen King, so I wrote a big, long, epic horror novel. I spent probably 2 years on the first draft, another 2 years kind of tinkering with it, before I finally felt comfortable sending it out to agents in New York to see if I could get it published. What I did was I got the Literary Guide to Agents from the Barnes & Noble, and I looked and found every literary agent that had an address in New York City. I typed up my query letter and I sent my 3 sample chapters. This was back in the day when you actually sent things in the mail. I sent them in the mail. Pretty much 100 query letters. I pretty much got 100 rejection letters back. But let me tell you something. There were a few of those rejection letters that had personalized notes that said, hey dude, your writing is pretty good. We just don't represent horror novels. Hey man, we think you're on the right track. Next time you have another novel, please send it. There was enough of those letters that were encouraging enough to know that I was on the right track. So what I did was, for my next novel, my second novel, I decided I was going to write an epic fantasy novel, kind of like Game of Thrones, Wheel of Time, stuff like that. Because I was, like I said, the first book I ever read that got me jazzed about writing was The Sword of Shannara by Terry Brooks, and that is one of the classic fantasy novels of all time. And so what I did was, and you can, when it comes to the nuts and bolts of how I wrote this fantasy novel, you can click on the links below to my other 2 writing videos, and you can get the information down there about how I actually wrote the novel. But what we're going to talk about today is how I got the novel published. So what I did was I finished the novel. It took me, again, about 2 years to do the first draft, but this time I spent about 4 or 5 years tinkering with the novel, rewriting it. I bet it went through close to 40 different drafts before I felt it was perfect enough, because I wanted it to be perfect. I knew this was going to be my one shot. I wanted this novel to be perfect. So I went through 40 drafts, and that's a lot of work, a lot of years worth of work, with no promise of anything paying off ever. But I did it anyway because I'm sorry, the cat just ran across the room and leapt up onto the drapes and hung there as high as she could and looked back at me as if, hey man, what you gonna do about it? You know, what you gonna do about it? And I just distracted me so bad I had to look. Anyway, I apologize for that weird moment. But let me tell you something. Let's get back to where I was. I did so many drafts of that book because I wanted it to be the perfect book that I could possibly send to my agent or to the agents that I was going to query. But instead of sending them to 100 different agents, what I did was I researched these guys. Now the internet became a more popular thing, and I actually subscribed to the internet at this point. So I got on the internet. Not only that, but I looked through some of my favorite fantasy novels like Tad Williams, Stephen Donaldson, Brandon Sanderson, Robert Jordan, George R. R. Martin. I figured out what agents, and if you'll notice, if you look in the acknowledgement page of all these books, they will acknowledge their agent, and you write that name down and you Google that name and you get that address and you get that website and you send your stuff to that person. And if you read enough fantasy books, you will see the same agent name crop up in a lot of these fantasy authors' names. So that's how I compiled the names that I used. But I only went, instead of 100 of them, I only went with 6. I picked the top 6 agents that represented big, huge fantasy novels because I knew that I had just written a big, huge fantasy novel that was 300,000 words. Just so you know, a 300,000 word novel is about the size of Game of Thrones, about the size of the first Wheel of Time book. Not quite as big as Brandon Sanderson stuff, but still, it's a big novel. The type of novel that they usually don't let first-time authors, publish or they don't give contracts. But I didn't care. I specifically targeted the 6 agents that represented huge novels, and I sent in my query letter, listen, I wrote a huge novel and I'm specifically sending this novel to you because you will not be scared of reading a huge novel because you already represent Patrick Rothfuss, you already represent Tad Williams, you already represent so-and-so author that's written a huge novel. So that's 6 agents the second time I queried. And what I did was I got my query letter perfect. I hired a professional editor to edit that query letter. It was 1 page long, not any longer. It was just who I was, why I was sending it specifically to them. Hey, you represent big fantasy novels. That's why I'm sending this to you. And then a brief description of my novel. And then I sent the first 3 chapters. And again, I made sure those first 3 chapters were the best writing I'd ever done. And again, I hired a professional editor to go over those things to make sure that it was perfect. Because I wanted this to be my shot. I wasn't fooling around this time. I'd already spent about 5 years fine-tuning this novel to the point where I thought it was ready. I was going to make sure that my introduction to the agents was perfect. And you need to do the same thing. Don't half-ass any of this stuff. You got to get it right. And the agents will notice, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. So I sent to these 6 agents, and let me tell you, 4 of them wrote me a letter back and said, send me the full manuscript. I am really interested in your proposal. Of those 4 agents, I got a phone call from 2 of them that said, I want to represent you. So I had my pick of 2 agents that were the top agents in the business. I chose the one that I liked. I signed with him. Within a very short time, well, let me back up. It wasn't a very short time. He read my novel. And he said, listen, I want to represent you, but I think you need to rewrite parts of this novel because your main character is not that interesting and we need to do a few things and switch a few things around. And I think that if you rewrite it in the way I say, we'll have a better shot of getting this published. And you know what? I didn't argue with the guy because this is a guy that represents some of my favorite writers, some people that I hero worshipped. I was going to listen to this guy. So I listened to him and I did what he said and I did the rewrites. And you know what? He asked me for those rewrites for several specific reasons. And this is something that a lot of people don't talk about, and I'm going to let you know right now. He asked me to do those rewrites because he wanted to see if I was an easy person to work with and that if I would follow advice and that if I was, because sometimes they get douchebags that they say, hey, will you rewrite this part? And an author will just be unprofessional about it and say, hey, I'm the artist here. I'm the one that knows best. You don't know anything. You're just an agent. And they won't do it. And if they do that, then the agent will be like, hey, I know not to work with this guy. I'm not going to work with this. I'm not going to try to sell his book because if I sell his book, then he's going to be a douchebag to the editor. And then it's a snowball effect. You always want to be professional. And you always want to do the right thing. And when he asked for those edits, I did my darndest to do it as best as I could the way he said. Now, did I agree with everything? Not necessarily. Did I make every change he wanted? Not necessarily. I get final say, but I knew that 99% of his advice was spot on, and so I followed it. I did those edits. I turned that book back into him. He sent it out to editors, all of his editor friends, and all of the big publishing houses, and guess what? We got offers for the book. And it happened pretty fast. And we ended up signing with Simon & Schuster, Saga Press. I got to talk to the editor. I felt comfortable with that editor. We signed a deal, and we started through the publishing process. And let me tell you, that's a good day. That's a very good day when your agent sends you that email saying, hey, we've got some editors that are interested in this. And then a few weeks later, he's like, we got some editors that are still interested in this. And then when we finally say, hey, one of the publishing houses has made a deal. Even in Germany, this is the German version of the book right here. We had a bidding war in Germany over every single German publisher kept outbidding each other for the rights to this book. It's exciting. It's exciting because you've almost accomplished your dream. You know, you worked so hard. I did 4 years on that horror novel. I did another 5 years on this fantasy. Now that's 9 years, 9 to 10 years of just working for a dream that there was no promise of it paying off ever. But yet I worked hard and I did things right and it worked out. It was starting to work out. I got a deal. Now what happened is my editor at Simon & Schuster, he said, hey, I love your book, but let's do some more edits. Keep in mind, I've already done over 40 edits. 40 of them on my own, one of them for my agent, and now he wants me to do another one. But guess what? All of the advice that he gave me, all of the edits that he wanted me to make, 99% of those were great advice, spot on. I had no problem with them. Yes, there were some things that I didn't agree with, just minor things that I kept my own way. But for between the agent's edits and the editor's edits, they were very non-intrusive onto the story. Not much changed. In fact, the only scene that really got kind of X'd out was a scene, it was the only sex scene I had in the book, and the editor just X'd it out with a note that said, let me save you the embarrassment. This isn't written very well. And I said, you know, I didn't disagree with it at all. I let that scene go. I wasn't a douchebag. I didn't try to hold on to it. I didn't try to tell him that I knew better. I knew that the professional thing to do was, that's good advice. I need to follow it. So, and you need to follow the advice. And what I'm saying, and let me back up a little bit to all the edits that I did. The 40 on my own just to get ready to be published. The one I did for my agent, the other one I did for my editor. And not only that, but there were 3 more edits that we went through. You know, the copy edits and the fine tuning. I mean, by the time this was published, it had been read by me at least 45 times. Now, let me tell you, a lot of you are out there are self-published authors, and I have no problem with that. I think you are brave people. But I think that a lot of you, and not all of you, because there are some self-published things out there that are fantastic and magnificent and works of genius. So I don't want to bag on those. But I will say, I click on Amazon.com on a lot of the self-published stuff, and 99 out of 100 ones that I click on, I can tell within the first page, within the first paragraph 50% of the time, some of the times within the first sentence, I can tell that book's not ready to be published or read. And that author should have done a lot more editing on this thing and a lot more polishing. Now, if you think I can tell that, there's a lot of readers that can tell that too. And the agents and editors can certainly tell that. Now, that's not to bag on self-publishing, but I think that a lot of it gets rushed out there. You know, and I'm glad that I didn't rush mine out. I'm glad that this fantasy novel went through over 40 edits to get good enough to be published by a traditional publisher, because that was my goal. That was my goal. I hats off to everybody that's self-published. I think it's a brave thing, but I think a lot of the self-published things need more polishing. And I think that they would get that because the authors are talented. They've written those books. If you've written a book, and even if you've self-published your first draft of that book, I still give you thumbs up. Keep on going, because eventually you're going to get better and better and better, and eventually your books will be awesome. And I think it's a mistake to sometimes self-publish some of that stuff, but we're not on the self-publishing. This is for traditional publishing. This is for traditional publishing. Make sure that your stuff is good, because those editors and those agents, they can spot it within the first sentence of your query letter. Before they even get to your 3 sample chapters, they will spot it. And when you go to the website, you let me say this with a little bit of do as I say, not as I do, but follow the advice that's on their website on how to submit your work to them. Follow it. Now, that being said, I did not follow anybody's advice. I went to their website and they said, email your samples here. And I was like, I'm not emailing them anything. I got their physical address and I physically sent them actual paper through the actual mail. And do you know what? Every single one of those agents that I talked to said, man, that got my attention. That was the first actual query I'd received in the mail in like 5 years. It got my attention. I actually opened it up and read it. Now, that, like I said, do as I say and not as I do. I kind of circumvented it. And if you want to watch another video, I'll click the link down here too. But it's an hour-long video that my agent and me and Tad Williams did at the Salt Lake City Comic-Con a few years ago about this very subject, about how to get published. And my agent represents a lot of the big-time fantasy authors like Tad Williams and C.J. Cherry and Diana Rowland and Pat Rothfuss even he represents, and me and a lot of people. And so he knows what he's talking about. And we did an hour-long panel at Salt Lake's Comic-Con about querying agents, querying editors, being a professional in the business. I will put a link to that down there too, so you can watch that too. It's an hour long of some of the best advice you'll ever get on querying agents and dealing with agents and getting a book deal. Let me just say in the end, to end, like I said, editors, they will be, these agents, they will be able to spot bad writing. So make sure your stuff is professional. Keep in mind, and Brandon Sanderson tells this, I've sat on a lot of panels and a lot of Comic-Cons with Brandon Sanderson, and he mentions this in a lot of the writing panels. He says, if you want to be a writer, keep in mind, your competition is Brandon Sanderson. Those agents you're querying are used to seeing writing as good as Brandon Sanderson. So you have to be that good to get an agent's attention. And you can be that good in your query letter and your first 3 chapters. And you can be that good in the rest of your manuscript also. You don't have to be perfect in the rest of your manuscript. They don't expect perfection in those manuscripts, but they do want perfection in that query letter and in those first 3 chapters that you send. So keep that in mind. If you follow those bits of advice to just polish, and make it the best presentation you can, you will get an agent. You will get an agent. Agents are always, they all want to find the next Game of Thrones. They all want to find the next Harry Potter. They all want that. And you might be it. So keep working, keep polishing your stuff, keep watching videos like this. Watch the rest of the videos on my channel. Subscribe to my channel. I've got some insider advice on my other 2 videos about writing that people just don't talk about in the business that will help you out. So please keep watching my videos, and I appreciate you watching this one, and I will see you later.